Breakfast with Bob.
Welcome, everybody. This is Breakfast with Bob. My name is Bob Babbitt. We're brought to you by the PTO, the Pro Triathletes Organization, by Amp Human, by VeloFix, Normatec, Form Swim Goggles, You Can, and our Challenged Athletes Foundation. We just sent out 3,921 grants, totaling $5.9 million to keep challenged athletes in the game of life through sport. Our next guest, 2016 Ironman 70.3 world champion, Holly Lawrence, joins us from her palatial estate somewhere in the Hollywood Hills. How you doing, Holly?
Hills? No, I live in Santa Monica. Thanks for having me anyway.
Growing up, was your main sport swimming, running? What would you grow up with?
I pretty much grew up swimming, but we would like put into everything growing up. So just keeping things light and fresh and not really like getting sucked into one thing, but like swimming, like I did gymnastics growing up, and me, my brother and sister, my sister went gymnastics and me and my brother went swimming. And then that's kind of how I fell into triathlon, because I was doing a bit of cross country running at school, and when kind of hit the plateau at swimming, that decided to give triathlon a go and do something different.
It's funny, I was interviewing Sam Long the other day. I didn't realize he was a triplet. You're a triplet.
Really?
Yeah, Sam Long is a triplet. And he said what was really cool is all three of them realized that they wanted to be in different sports so that they didn't compete with each other. And so, yeah, so you had the sister stayed in gymnastics, and you and your brother went to swimming. And your brother, what, Olympic trials type of caliber swimmer?
Like Olympic trials and everything. I was like the middle child. I was like classical middle child. I wanted to swim with my brother. I wanted to do gymnastics with my sister. My sister was really upset, and I only found this out in later life. My sister was really upset when I wanted to do gymnastics with her, because she was like, no, this is my thing, apparently. And swimming, when she used to swim, because we all started doing everything. We all did ballet and everything. But at swimming, at the like little club galas that we used to do, my sister used to bin all of her medals because they were always second to me. And my parents used to fish them out of the bin, but I only found this out later life. And I was like, oh, Abby, I thought we were doing it together.
I thought we were friends. What the heck?
I know. And she was like so turned off competition. I feel like, yeah, she kind of went the other way. And me and my brother were like super competitive the other way, but I was like always in my brother's shadow, but trying to like muscle in on him.
Yeah. But then was it your parents who said, hey, maybe this triathlon thing might be good for you, because you probably got to a certain plateau in swimming, and then you also had cross country running, so you had 2 out of 3.
Yeah, I can't really remember how it started, but I remember I think someone suggested it to my parents, and then we like borrowed a bike off a boy that it kind of fit me, and so I did like a local triathlon and loved it. So that kind of then, you know, spread that thing that I was then doing like the local chain gang on my bike when I was like a 16-year-old girl with, you know, not even clip-in shoes, with like middle-aged men, thinking like, you know, just trying to keep up for as long as I can before I got dropped.
So when did you realize that you could be good at this? Because it's one thing just riding with some of the middle-aged guys in the neighborhood. Another thing to think, maybe I can go to the Olympics.
So I don't think, like, so the way I was with swimming, like I kind of just grew to learn that like I wasn't ever going to be any good, and that was okay. Like to be okay with it, I just had to get out of it what I did for myself, and that's like beating my own times or just being as best as I could be. So even in triathlon, I didn't really get that way. And I also saw how it really affected my brother, because like he was gonna go to the Olympics, went to pentathlon because he got recruited, again going to go to the Olympics, and then when that didn't happen, he like was shattered, and you know his whole identity was tied up in it, and it was like part of it that like wearing the British kit was like such a big deal for him and my parents, whereas to me I was like, ugh, I don't want any of that. Like I was like totally the opposite, because I kind of rebelled against it.
So when you go to, but you ended up going Commonwealth Games 2014
Yeah.
and obviously doing well. Uh, was the goal that at that point to go for 2016 and potentially go to Rio?
No, I mean, I only did the Commonwealth Games because I could, because it was like an option. And I knew how it was so important to like, everyone else. Like the Commonwealth meant so much to everyone else and less so to me. And like, it was a political nightmare anyway. Like I was there for just this super sprint relay, and I wasn't allowed to race any other races, like non-drafting races that year, which I kind of just started dabbling in a little bit, like doing high V, which I loved. So that kind of, the like politics of everything kind of really turned me off. And it just didn't suit me. Like I was never the fastest runner. It was a game back then, especially like that. It was like a swim runner's game that the bike, it was just totally dependent on who was there and how everyone was going to work together. And it just didn't play to my strengths. And whenever I did like a non-drafting race, I just loved it so much more that then after doing Commonwealth Games and, being really kind of dejected, like after it didn't feel good. And I was kind of like, screw it. I want to go non-draft and I want to move to America, and it being kind of like a lifestyle thing. And even then, like I never thought like I would make a career out of it. It was more just like, this is what I love doing and I'm going to do it as long as I can. And then like the fallback is always, I'm going to move in back with mom and dad and that'll be fine.
So back at that time, I think people, because the Olympics for triathlon didn't start to 2000, so people were still trying to figure out what the best route was. Would you get 3 athletes who could potentially win, or do we get a domestique? So someone like Holly, who's a great swimmer, really good on the bike, and we have her work for the other people who we want to win medals. Did you get the feel that that's the way they were looking at you?
Yeah, eventually that's kind of the way it was going. Because like I've told this story a few times, so apologies if you've heard it before, but when I was selected for a European Championship race it must have been 2013 or 14, maybe 13. I was selected by my own merit from doing European Cup races and everything, and so I was definitely not there to be a domestique, and I was also trying to jump through hoops to try and get on funding, because that was just always the next step, because that's just how it worked. It was like, what's the next step? Okay, what's the next step? And during the race, like it all was like panning out really well. After the swim, I was like in the lead group, like starting a breakaway with like Nicholas Spirig and I can't remember the other girl, like on cobbles, and we like distanced straight away and we're just like working and great, like strong biker. And then I was getting shouted at by the British Triathlon people on the course telling me to stop and wait for another girl behind me and I just had no idea. I didn't know what to do, because these were the people like I was also trying to impress. Like I'm trying to be accepted by these people, and every time it kind of got angrier, because like you go through laps and there's other people, and it got to the point that I like totally like slowed down, rode onto the side of the road to them saying like, what do you want me to do? And I like stopped, waited, and it felt like an eternity, like spun up to the group. But then I ended up just like messing with the group that I was in, which just isn't me at all. And just like, it just was totally like a mess. And I ended up having like an average race, but I just totally threw my race away to be a domestique, which I wasn't there to be. And I was like crying in the hotel room afterwards. And then obviously like then I was aware afterwards that there's a domestique like pilot program that they were doing at the time. And that's kind of, it was like the start of it that just really like turned me off.
Yeah.
It just didn't suit me. That's not what I was there for. And I just felt like I didn't have a chance to race for myself.
You're a competitive person. The last thing you want to do is just when you're doing that type of stuff, there's too much thinking. It's fun just to go off the front, right? You're a racer. You want to go off the front race.
And but it was just for like, there was no, we didn't communicate that beforehand. There was just, it just seemed so bizarre to me. I was like, what? I'm just meant to stop and wait for somebody who's a better runner than me to pull them up. And yeah, that was just really hard. And there was just a lot of, it didn't suit me anyway, really, ITU. And then going to non-draft, I was like, oh, this is lovely. Like, it's my own race. And it's just like, it's the best, the fastest swim, bike, runner that does well. It's not, there's less tactics, there's less you can save in one area because it's just the, cumulative time that counts.
You moved to LA, and then 2015 was also, I remember, Oceanside 70.3, and who's the girl? I think it was like you had a race kit with no logos on there, and you're off the front and you're leading in the bike until 7-8 miles of the run. That was sort of the coming out party from my perspective. It's like, who is this girl? And she's kicking people's ass and she's just going for it. You weren't intimidated by those people at all.
I didn't have a clue what I was doing. It was great. It was like, I just got to do it. And like, I totally, bonked at mile 8 or whatever, but I still came, I think I came 3rd or 4th. I can't remember. But no, it was just great. I just loved, like, I felt like I didn't have any pressure as well. Like before with ITU, it's like, I found the swim stressful. It was like, phew, that's over. The bike's over. Phew, okay. Like, it's just a totally different mentality, which I just loved.
So then 70.3 Worlds, you get 11th 70.3 Worlds in Austria.
Which I was really injured before. Yeah. I'd run like 2 30-minute straight runs before that. And I chewed chewing gum the whole time because I had an ITB issue. And I was chewing gum the whole time because it was distracting me from the like anxiety of like whether my ITB is going to be an issue. And my jaw was like, I couldn't move my jaw after the race. But yeah, it's just funny to look back on those like really early days, which I was still kind of figuring things out, doing things wrong, going too hard and putting myself in a bit of a hole or an injury kind of state. So yeah, and then 2016 things kind of
right.
Yeah.
Well, and the deal is, it's one thing to deal with pressure when you feel it's other people's pressure. It's another thing when you're racing 2016. The pressure is, I need to make enough money to pay my rent. I need to make enough money, right, to get a car. But that's all on you, and that's okay because it's what you want to do. You've made that decision that either I'm going to make it here or I'm going to go back and live in mom and dad's basement. So I better get some performances.
It was a real motivator because every position you were like, that's, X amount of dollars. Like that person, that wasn't a person to me. That was just like a figure like on their back. And I didn't even know like really like sponsorship bonuses existed. I just thought, this is the prize money. This is great. Like,
yeah.
And I was just racing my ass off and, trying to make money.
And doing so well because you escaped from Alcatraz, St. George, Beijing International, Mount Tremblant, Santa Rosa. I mean, you were on a roll. You're like winning everything. And how did that change things in 2016 when you win Worlds?
Yeah, so going into Worlds, I was pitched as one of the 5 favorites. And I was like, I shouldn't be here. Like, I don't know what to say. I'm not one of the favorites. And like, even on the NBC interview, like they wanted me to say like, I'm going for the win, blah, 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 blah. And I just wouldn't. I was like, I want to swim, bike and run as fast as I can. And they were kind of like, God, Holly, you got to give us something to work with. And I'm like, but that's the truth. Like, I still really didn't have that like expectation of myself. And I also didn't have anybody else's expectation, which I look back on now and I'm like, wow, what a privileged position to be in when you're the underdog.
Yeah, when nobody knows, right?
Yeah.
So then you have I think it was like November of 17, where you have the bike crash, and you
Mhm.
don't think that much of it, but your foot, your ankle just like blows up, and you still get on a plane, I think. And did you go to Island House and then went to Bahrain? And if you like, it was third at Island House. I think you won Bahrain.
All right. Yeah.
Won Bahrain. And meanwhile, you know there's something wrong with your ankle.
Well, I did when I crashed on my bike and then had some issues. Like I honestly, that night, I was fine during the day, went to PT, normal. I'm like, yeah, just normal bruising. And that night, it just went from 0 to 100, worst pain I've ever been in. And I was phoning my PT in tears, like, you're going to think I'm crazy, but I think my foot's broken. And they're like, this is really odd. And I just like Sean, my boyfriend, had to carry me into the bedroom. We packed it with ice. Like I didn't know whether to go any, I didn't know what to do. So we're just like, okay, wait till the morning and then figure out. And I could kind of walk and then it was like 10 days later, I raced Island House and it was fine, but it just didn't feel, but like in my head, I'm like, oh, I'm fine. Like I knew I was kind of mad. I was doing these weird exercises to just like, yeah, my foot's just behaving a little differently, but like I still could run normally, everything was fine. And I really kind of forgot about it. But just this new kind of like this weird little quirk in my ankle foot. And yeah, then it wasn't until Oceanside, which on the bike, when I was driving out of the saddle, and my foot gave way and nearly hit the deck. And then it was when I forgot about it again, just like tightened my shoe up. And then it was when I went to dismount that I again nearly hit the deck and thought, oh my God, it doesn't fit. Like there's something really wrong. And I'm like limping through transition, like, oh my God, what am I going to do? And I somehow just got over it and ran a half marathon on a broken foot.
On some of the hardest pavement there is, that concrete in Oceanside. It's not blacktop, that's concrete you're running on. And I remember when you came across the finish line, basically at that point, the leg just gave out.
Oh, I couldn't put pressure on it there. And that's at that point, I was like, ha ha ha, like it'll be fine. I've had this before. I just need to sleep it off. I'll be fine. But Sean had to carry me everywhere. I couldn't walk on it. I couldn't put any pressure on it. And then even like for a couple of days, I was just such in denial still, because I'm like, oh, now I really pissed it off because I run half marathon on it, but it'll be fine.
Yeah.
And it just wasn't. It was like black and blue. My PT was like, oh, can you just send me a photo of it? And he was like, you need to get that x-ray. So I'm like, no.
You knew.
Yeah. Oh my God. I mean, I couldn't do anything. I was hopping around everywhere.
So was it a fracture?
It was a clean fracture right down the middle of my navicular, which is the worst bone to break because it's just got such bad, like,
blood flow.
Yeah, there's no blood flow to it. It's like, this zone that just doesn't get any blood, and the success rate of people coming back from it is just so low, and then people have problems and whatever else. So yeah, it was hard just getting through that initial period.
Well, and you're somebody who obviously has been working out every day for years. That's part of your identity. It's sanity. And now you have to have surgery, and it's 8 months of recovery where you don't know, your career could be over.
Yeah. So first there was a surgeon that was like, okay, 6 weeks, we'll cast this thing up and you're going to be good as new. I'm like, great, I'll take that option. And we were getting CT scans every 2 weeks. Nothing was happening. This thing isn't healing. And so I go and see another surgeon, and this is now the surgeon, the doctor of doom, I call her, because she just gave me the most like morbid, prognosis, coming out saying, you're not going to be, and I even recorded her because it was so bad. that she was like, you're not going to come back from this, you know, your career's over. Like, and I'm like, can I even run again? They're like, well, I'm not sure. Like, it's, you know, I was just so bleak. I came out scream crying, like my life was over. And even at one point I was like, well, can I just try and run through this for another couple of years? And she's like, no, you can't. I'm like, oh, but I think I can. And then I eventually got put into contact with this amazing surgeon that I ended up going with in Palo Alto, who's done a ton of these like specific fractures, and like with all like track and field, long distance runners. And he was like very just to the point. He was like, yes, this is a horrible injury, but I am gonna like knock this out of the park. That's what he said on the phone, and you'll be okay, but it's gonna be 16 weeks until you're running a step after surgery. And at that point, I'm like, it's not a life sentence. Like, I'll take that easy. And yeah, it was just like, it was a long road of just being casted up for, you know, that long. Cause I'd already had 6 weeks of wasting time before that. So yeah, but it was like, you know, it was my identity. It was my everything of being an athlete and training. And so I was, you know, reduced to putting a baggie on my cast and just swimming every day with a pool buoy between my legs. And it was just totally different, and a lot of mental games.
What was the lowest point?
Probably wiping out on my crutches at the swimming pool floor and getting up sobbing and getting in a mood when all the little old ladies at the pool were telling me their horror stories of their broken bones. And I was just like, you know, and I just felt like it was so bleak, like everything, it was just, yeah. So I just wish I knew what I knew now then, and you just never do. Like, no. I wouldn't have stressed out so much about it if, you know, I knew I was going to be fine.
When did you know that you're going to be fine? When did you, because I'm sure you were very tentative when you first were told you could run again. I'm sure you were like, oh my God, I better find some grass to run on. I better, this is, you can't break it again. You break it again, you're done.
The fear is so real for so long. It's only, you only realize you're truly fixed when you lose the fear. And like, so my coach was really good. My coach, he made me wear these like bone loading devices on my feet. So, and they look like timing chips around each of my ankles. And I hated wearing them because they dig into your bones. It's horrible. But it really, and I had to wear them for like months kind of coming back. But like, I was never allowed to progress until I was even. So like, I wasn't favoring so it just like stopped any like compensation injuries and everything. And even though I hated it at the time, I think it really helped that I just never got ahead of myself and never pushed it too much. And at that point, I'd just been through so much that you're not messing around with it. You're not going to risk putting yourself back. And then, you know, I raced my first race in December, but even then I was still petrified. Yeah. I was petrified of running a half marathon on it. Because even though I knew I could, and I was, you know, doing all the training, you still have that fear. Like, oh, I'm going to be running barefoot to my bike. I'm going to be running barefoot, you know, anything in transition. You're so petrified.
So when did you feel you were back? Was there one race where you felt like, okay, because you need to get to a point where you're not thinking the ankle, where you're actually thinking about that person you're racing, right? Where racing is coming in rather than I'm hoping my foot stays together.
I don't actually know when it was. I think it's funny, like whenever you have a little niggle or anything that you're conscious of, there's suddenly a point that someone says, oh, how's your, you know, Achilles or whatever it is. And you go, oh, yeah, I can't even remember when that stops. Like it's just not a weight in your head anymore. And you realize like, oh my gosh, I'm over it. Like I'm over the fear of it. And So I can't really remember when it was, but it was probably because I raced Dubai that year, and definitely by then I was definitely over it. Yeah.
So you go to Nice, right? 70.3 is where you won your world championship, back in 16. You're 2019, Nice, hilly bike ride, really fast run, and you're back there at the starting line at 70.3 Worlds. What did it mean to be back at the starting line, and then just to have the race? When we were with you at that finish, that was about as raw as it can be, right? You had gone through hell for the last 2 years, basically, and now you come in second at the 70.3 World Championships, and I bet you were more emotional there than you were when you won it back in 16.
Yeah, I mean, I said when I kind of came back after the injury, it was like I got a new lease of life. Like, I'm just gonna freaking enjoy this as much as I can, because you don't know when it's gonna be over. And I think like a lot of the pressures that I let get to me in the previous season, after I like got sponsors and everything, and like I just kind of lost, and I just was so grateful. I was so grateful to be back doing something that I just really love, just being in the mix. And even though that course, like, I loved all the climbing, but the descending was like, oh hell, this is not in my wheelhouse. This is not what I'm good at. I'm just going to try and be the best I can be, and that's going to have to be good enough for me to be okay with it. That's all that matters. And kind of hedging everything else of everyone else's expectations. And yeah, I was just like super proud of myself, and like going into that race, that's all I was focusing on, like being proud of my effort. And that's all that I can ask for, not other people's expectations that I'm trying to fill. And yeah, it was just really, it was emotional. Yeah.
Well, especially because you're like the first part of the run, you were taking time out of Daniela Reef. You got it down to about 2 minutes, and you're like, oh my God.
I was about to play. That was it.
That's okay. But there was at the end of the year, you were actually talking about doing a full Ironman this year, something you had always said, no way. I finish a half, and that seems stupid enough, and double that distance makes absolutely no sense. I figured this was a good COVID thing for you, because you don't have to do an Ironman now, right?
No, I want to. That's the thing. Like,
really,
I do not. I'm like, let's be real. I don't relish the idea of like exercising like hard for 9 something hours. Like, I honestly don't know. I can't get my head around it, and it's probably best that I don't. But there's something so like, I'm just so curious, and I love, like, I've been with Kona multiple times now with like Oakley, and being part of it, and I hate not being part of the race. And I think every time I'm there, I'm like, oh, if I could just check my bike in, I would. Like, it's just one of those things that it's such like a big part of the history of the sport and everything else. And like, it's such a crazy race at Kona, at least, that it's just, the most things happen. It's just ridiculous that you just like, I want to see how I can measure up and what would happen. So
sure. How did all this dealing with the foot, how did all this change you as an athlete and your approach to your sport?
I think it like really puts everything into perspective. Like, everything that you kind of let have weight before, the pressures and everything that you realize you're putting on yourself, it's not other people. And it just like really grounded me in a way that you realize that you do have a finite period of time. Like, your career will end at some point. It's a very, fragile thing. And I'm so lucky. I never would have thought when I was like 15, 16 that I would be actually having a career in something that I would do as a hobby, that I'm more grateful and just like so appreciative of the experiences that's now like it's like back to what I was when I was an underdog almost. That's the same like energy that I'm keeping. And just being like wanting myself to be there and forgetting the noise that can really distract you.
What do your brother and sister think of this craziness?
Um, so my brother, we were like super competitive growing up, and we've kind of had a like hard relationship since, because like I'm almost living the life he should have, because he was the hotshot athlete. He was the one that was meant to go to the Olympics, meant to, you know, I was the one that wasn't talented, wasn't. So we don't really have too much to do with like my sport together. Whereas my sister, who would be the one winning my medals, like she's like my biggest cheerleader. She is the best. She's like a niece. She printed all these holly faces, and my whole family were going around with these like holly faces, and they had like Team Lawrence t-shirts that she made, and like, yeah, she makes like a big deal about it, and like she doesn't like get triathlon, but it's just amazing, and like, yeah, I love that part of it.
Okay, we're going to go to some quickie answers, quick questions, quick answers, rapid fire. What's your go-to comfort food?
Froyo.
Favorite racing memory?
Malulabar. Crossing the finish line, like going for that tape, not clapping any hands, just being like.
Favorite book or podcast?
Joe Rogan.
Joe Rogan is great. I love him.
It's like 3 hours, perfect bike ride material.
What's your go-to technology?
Aura Ring and my Garmin.
Tell me about the Oura Ring. What's that?
It tracks your sleep. So like every morning you're like, how did I do?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Are you normally a good sleeper or no?
Yeah, but you just like you have no idea. You think, oh, I slept well, but it's just, and it like tracks your recovery, like your heart rate variability, your body temperature, and everything else that just, it's like your recovery kind of stuff.
What words do you like to hear from a coach?
Good job. I don't know.
Because what is it about you that's helped you become a champion, to overcome what you've had to overcome?
Probably just the love of what I do, ultimately.
Perfect. Hey, Holly, thank you so much for taking time. So fun to catch up with you. And you know, are you one of the few pro triathletes living in LA?
Yeah, I don't know why. No one else comes here. Everyone's in Boulder.
But the training in Santa Monica, training up in the mountains there, and you got Tower 26 to swim, you've got the ocean. Mm-hmm. I think people are missing it.
I know. I think it's expensive though. That's why people don't come.
Holly Lawrence has been our guest. Holly, you are the best. Thank you so much for taking time.
Thanks so much, Bob.
Holly Lawrence has been our guest. We're brought to you by the PTO, the Pro Triathletes Organization, by Amp Human, VeloFix, Normatec Form Goggles, UCAN, our Challenged Athletes Foundation. We've now raised $123 million, sent out 30,000 grants for athletes in 103 different sports in all 50 states and 73 different countries. Holly Lawrence, again, has been our guest. You are the absolute best. Thank you, Holly.